My son's birthday was supposed to be a happy family celebration. My wife and I arrived with a simple gift and smiles on our faces. But before dinner was served, my daughter-in-law walked over to my wife, looked her up and down, and said something that made the entire room go silent. "Get out." My wife froze. She looked at me and quietly whispered, "Richard, let's just go." I was about to take her hand and leave. But then I stood up. For years, I had kept one truth from my son, my daughter-in-law, and everyone else in that room. And that night, after watching my wife being humiliated in front of our own family, I finally decided to tell them. I looked at my daughter-in-law and said just one thing. "You can ask my wife to leave, but before she does, you should know whose money helped build this house." Her smile disappeared, and what I revealed next changed everything. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, hidden secrets, and moments when the truth finally comes out, make sure to subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if someone told your wife to get out in front of the entire family? Where are you watching from today? I'd love to know your city or country. Now, let's get into the story. I still remember that Saturday afternoon like it happened yesterday. It was my son Daniel's birthday, and for once, I was actually looking forward to spending time with the whole family. My wife, Eleanor, had been getting ready since lunch. She changed her outfit 3 times before finally settling on a simple blue dress. "You think this is okay?" she asked me while looking at herself in the mirror. I smiled. "You look beautiful. You always do." She rolled her eyes and laughed. "You're only saying that because you're my husband." "Exactly. That makes my opinion the only one that matters." She laughed again. That was my wife. Even after 40 years of marriage, she could still make me smile over the smallest things. We bought Daniel a nice watch for his birthday. Nothing crazy, just something we thought he would like. By 5 o'clock, we were driving to Daniel and Victoria's house. They lived in a beautiful neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. Big houses, perfectly trimmed lawns, expensive cars sitting in driveways. Victoria loved that kind of life. She always had. When we pulled into their driveway, I noticed at least 20 cars already parked along the street. "It looks like quite a party," Eleanor said. "Daniel only turns 39 once." I joked. She smiled. But the moment we walked through the front door, something felt different. The house was beautifully decorated. Balloons everywhere. A long dining table had been set up in the living room, and there were flowers in the center of every table. People were laughing, drinking, and taking pictures. Daniel spotted us from across the room. "Mom, Dad." He walked over and hugged both of us. "I'm glad you guys came." I patted him on the shoulder. "Wouldn't miss it, son." Eleanor handed him the gift. "Happy birthday." Daniel smiled when he saw the box. "You didn't have to get me anything." "We know," Eleanor said. "That's why we got you something." He laughed. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then Victoria walked over. She hugged me briefly, but when she saw Eleanor, her smile disappeared almost instantly. "Hi, Eleanor." "Hi, Victoria. Happy birthday to Daniel." "Thanks." Her eyes moved slowly over Eleanor's dress. Then she looked toward the crowded living room. "You know, we weren't expecting quite this many people." Eleanor looked confused. "Oh, I hope we're not in the way." Victoria smiled. No, it's fine." But there was something about the way she said it that made me uncomfortable. A few minutes later, Victoria came back and pointed toward a small table near the kitchen. "Eleanor, could you sit over there? The main table is reserved for Daniel's friends and some of my colleagues." Eleanor looked at the table. There were already several empty chairs. "Oh," she said quietly. "Of course." I looked at Victoria. I wanted to say something, but Eleanor gently touched my arm. "It's okay, Richard." So I let it go. We sat near the kitchen while the party continued around us. I watched Daniel move from guest to guest, smiling and shaking hands. He looked happy. That was all I cared about. Then, about 20 minutes later, I saw Victoria walk over to Daniel. She leaned toward him and whispered something. Daniel looked in our direction. His eyes landed on his mother. Then he looked back at Victoria. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Daniel's expression change. Victoria leaned closer and said something else. This time, I caught only a few words. "Your mother shouldn't be here tonight." I stared at them. For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. Daniel didn't argue. He simply looked uncomfortable and walked away. Eleanor was sitting beside me, completely unaware of what had just happened. She smiled and asked, "What are you looking at?" I looked at my wife. Then I looked across the room at Victoria. Something told me this birthday party was about to become very different from what I had expected. And I had no idea that, before the night was over, Victoria would look directly at my wife and say two words I would never forget. Get out. Chapter 2. The First Insult. For the next few minutes, I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood Victoria. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she was dealing with too many guests. Maybe she had simply said something she didn't mean. I wanted to believe that because it was my son's birthday. I didn't want to be the father who ruined his own son's celebration by starting an argument. So I stayed quiet. Eleanor, as usual, didn't seem bothered. She was sitting beside me, watching people talk and laugh. Every now and then, she smiled at someone walking past. That's just how my wife was. She could be treated unfairly and still find a way to make everyone else comfortable. A little later, one of Victoria's friends walked over. She was a woman I'd never met before, probably someone from Victoria's social circle. She looked at Eleanor and smiled politely. "Are you Daniel's mother?" Eleanor smiled back. "Yes." "How nice. I've heard so much about you." Eleanor looked surprised. "Really?" The woman nodded. "Victoria talks about family all the time." I almost laughed. If only she knew. Eleanor thanked her, and the woman walked away. Then Victoria appeared beside us. "I hope you're comfortable over here," she said. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, we're fine." Victoria glanced at the empty chairs at the main table. "Good. Because those seats are for the people who were specifically invited to dinner." I looked at her. "Victoria, we're Daniel's parents." She smiled. "I know, Richard." There was something cold in her voice. "But this is my house, and I plan the seating." Eleanor quickly touched my hand. "It's okay." Again, she was trying to keep the peace. I took a breath and let it go. But things only got worse. During dinner, Eleanor got up to help one of the older guests who had dropped a napkin. Victoria noticed. "Eleanor, you don't have to do that." My wife smiled. "It's no trouble." Victoria shook her head. "You don't need to act like you're working here." The woman Eleanor had helped looked uncomfortable. So did I? Eleanor simply sat back down. She didn't say anything. I leaned toward her. "You okay?" She nodded. "I'm fine." But I knew my wife. She wasn't fine. She just didn't want me to make a scene. About 10 minutes later, Daniel came over. He looked tired. "Mom, Dad, everything okay?" Eleanor smiled immediately. "Of course." I looked at my son. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to ask him why his wife was treating his mother like an unwanted guest. But before I could say anything, Victoria called his name from across the room. "Daniel." He turned around. "I'll be right back." He walked away. Eleanor sighed. "Don't say anything to him." I stared at her. "Why not?" "Because it's his birthday." I shook my head. "You shouldn't have to put up with this." She gave me that familiar little smile. "It's one night, Richard." I didn't answer. Maybe she was right. Maybe it really was just one bad night. But then I noticed Victoria talking to two of her friends. She glanced toward us. Then one of the women looked directly at Eleanor and whispered something. They both laughed. That was when I stopped giving Victoria the benefit of the doubt. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She was embarrassed by my wife. And for some reason, she wanted everyone else to feel the same way. A few minutes later, Victoria walked past our table again. She stopped. "You know, Eleanor, you might want to freshen up before the cake." My wife looked confused. "Why?" Victoria forced a smile. "Nothing. I just think you look a little tired." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I'm fine." Victoria walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. My hands tightened around the glass I was holding. I had spent years teaching myself to stay calm. But there comes a point when silence stops being patience. It becomes permission. And I was getting dangerously close to that point. Then I saw Victoria walk toward Eleanor again. This time, she wasn't smiling. And from the look on her face, I knew she wasn't coming over to make another polite suggestion. She had something else to say. Something much worse. Chapter 3. Get out. Victoria stopped right in front of Eleanor. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The music was still playing in the background. People were laughing. Someone near the kitchen was taking pictures of the birthday cake. But somehow, Everything around our table suddenly felt quiet. Victoria crossed her arms. Eleanor, can I talk to you for a second? My wife looked up at her. Sure. Victoria glanced around the room before lowering her voice. You've been here for a while now. Eleanor looked confused. Yes. It's Daniel's birthday. I know. Victoria sighed. I just don't understand why you're making things difficult. I could feel my blood pressure rising. What exactly is she doing? I asked. Victoria looked at me. I wasn't talking to you, Richard. She's my wife. And she's my husband's mother. Victoria gave a little smile. So we both know who she is. I didn't like her tone. Eleanor gently touched my arm. Richard, it's okay. Victoria looked at Eleanor again. You were asked to sit in the kitchen. Eleanor blinked. I thought you wanted me there because the table was full. It wasn't. Victoria pointed toward the dining room. There are empty seats. Eleanor looked over. There were, in fact, several empty chairs. I didn't realize, she said. Victoria shook her head. That's the problem. I stood up slowly. What problem? Victoria looked at me, then back at Eleanor. You two came here without understanding what kind of event this is. I stared at her. It's our son's birthday. Exactly. She paused. This is an important event for Daniel. There are people here from his company. Important people. I almost laughed. So, Victoria's expression hardened. So, I don't want anything embarrassing happening tonight. Eleanor's face changed. She finally understood what Victoria was saying. You think I'm embarrassing? Victoria didn't answer immediately. That silence said enough. Eleanor looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. You're not listening. Victoria stepped closer. I've tried to be polite all evening. I couldn't hold it anymore. Polite. Victoria looked at me. Yes. You insulted my wife 3 times in less than an hour. I did no such thing. You told her where to sit. You commented on her clothes. You told her not to help a guest. Victoria rolled her eyes. Everything doesn't have to be a family drama, Richard. Eleanor stood up. Please stop. She looked at me. Let's just go home. I shook my head. We're not leaving because she. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Please. There was something in her eyes that made me stop. She didn't want to fight. Not here. Not on Daniel's birthday. So I nodded. Okay. Eleanor picked up her purse. She turned toward Victoria. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Victoria stared at her. Then she said the words that changed everything. Good. Eleanor stopped. Victoria pointed toward the front door. Then get out. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. The room went silent. Even the music seemed too loud. Eleanor slowly looked around. People had stopped talking. Some were staring at us. Daniel was standing near the cake table. He had heard everything. My wife looked at him. For just a second, I saw hope in her eyes. She was waiting for her son to say something. Anything. Daniel opened his mouth. But nothing came out. Eleanor looked away. She whispered, It's okay. Then she started walking toward the door. I watched my wife take 3 steps. That's when something inside me finally broke. For years, I had stayed quiet. I had ignored the little insults. I had overlooked the disrespect. I had told myself that keeping peace was more important than being right. But watching my wife walk out of her own son's birthday party like an unwanted stranger was something I could not accept. I stood up. Everyone turned toward me. Victoria looked almost annoyed. Richard, don't make this worse. I looked directly at her. My voice was calm. Almost too calm. You can ask my wife to leave this house. Victoria smirked. Thank you. I took 1 step forward. But before she does, her smile disappeared. You should know whose money helped build this house. Nobody moved. Daniel stared at me. Victoria's face went pale. And for the first time that evening, I realized something. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. Nobody said a word. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of someone putting a glass down on the kitchen counter. Victoria stared at me like I had just spoken another language. What are you talking about? She finally asked. I looked at her. I think you heard me. Daniel stepped away from the cake table. Dad. I raised my hand. Not yet, son. Daniel stopped. I wasn't angry with him. Not yet. I was just tired. Tired of watching my wife get treated like she was somehow less important because she didn't wear expensive clothes or spend her weekends worrying about what other people thought. Victoria crossed her arms. You're seriously going to stand here and pretend you paid for this house? I didn't say I paid for all of it. She smiled. Because you didn't. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. I paid the down payment. Victoria's smile disappeared. Daniel looked at her. What? I turned toward my son. Your mother and I gave you the money for the down payment 3 years ago. Daniel stared at me. I thought you said that was your retirement money. It was. He looked confused. Then why would you give it to us? I smiled sadly. Because you needed a home. Victoria shook her head. That doesn't mean you own this house. No, I said. It doesn't. I put my phone back into my pocket. But it does mean your mother didn't walk into this house as some unwanted stranger. Victoria rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. I looked at her. Is it? She didn't answer. I continued. You've spent the entire evening trying to make Eleanor feel small because you think we don't belong here. Victoria looked away. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I took a breath. For years, you thought we were struggling. She laughed nervously. Well, you certainly never told us otherwise. Exactly. Daniel looked at me. Dad, what are you talking about? I turned toward him. Son, I never wanted you to know. Know what? I looked at Eleanor. She gave me a small nod. She knew this moment was coming. I looked back at Daniel. I didn't lose my company when I retired. Daniel's face changed. What? I sold it. Victoria's eyes narrowed. When? 7 years ago. How much? I didn't answer immediately. That number wasn't important. The look on Victoria's face told me she was already doing the math in her head. I finally said, Enough. She frowned. That doesn't prove anything. I nodded. Maybe not. Then I pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of my jacket. It was a copy of a property statement. I handed it to Daniel. He unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at me. Dad. What? He swallowed. This company. He pointed at the name printed at the top. Richard Miller Holdings? I nodded. Yes. Daniel looked confused. That's yours. Yes. Victoria stepped closer. What does that have to do with tonight? I looked directly at her. Everything. I pointed toward Daniel. Do you know who owns the building your company rents? Daniel shook his head. No. I smiled. I do. He stared at me. Why? Because I own it. The room erupted into whispers. Victoria's face went completely white. Daniel looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. Eleanor sat quietly near the door, holding her purse in her lap. She had known about the property. She had known about the money. But she had never told Daniel. Not because we wanted to deceive him. We simply wanted to know one thing. Would our son still love us if he thought we had nothing? For years, we had our answer. And tonight, after watching his wife tell his mother to get out, I realized the test had finally come to an end. I looked at Victoria. You told my wife she didn't belong here. She said nothing. I continued. You were right about one thing. She looked at me. This is your house. Then I glanced at Daniel. But don't ever confuse owning a house with owning the people inside it. Nobody spoke. And that was when Daniel finally walked over to his mother. He stood in front of Eleanor. His voice was barely above a whisper. Mom. Eleanor looked up. I'm sorry. For the first time that night, my wife smiled. But she didn't say anything. Because some apologies come too late. And some truths take years to finally be spoken. Daniel stood in front of his mother for several seconds without saying anything. I could see the guilt on his face. Not the kind of guilt you could hide with a smile or a quick apology. This was different. It was the kind that makes you remember every time someone was there for you when you didn't even realize you needed them. Mom, he said again. Eleanor looked at him. It's okay, Daniel. No, it isn't. His voice cracked. I should have stopped her. Eleanor gave him a tired smile. You were caught in the middle. No. Daniel shook his head. I wasn't. He looked at Victoria. I just didn't say anything, V. Victoria immediately stepped forward. Daniel, don't do this. He turned toward her. Don't do what? Make me the villain. Daniel stared at her. You told my mother to get out. I was trying to protect our party. You humiliated her. I was trying to. You humiliated my mother. The room went quiet again. Victoria looked around, almost expecting someone to defend her. Nobody did. I watched Eleanor lower her eyes. She didn't look satisfied. She wasn't enjoying this. That was another thing about my wife. Even when she had every right to be angry, she didn't enjoy watching someone else suffer. Daniel walked over to me. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me? Tell you what? That you still had money. I smiled. I didn't think it mattered. He looked confused. Of course it matters. No, son. That's where you're wrong. I pointed toward the room. Look around. Daniel did. All these people know you as a successful man. They know your job, your house, your car, your wife. I paused. But very few people know who you were before all of that. Daniel didn't respond. I continued. When you were 24, you called me from your apartment because you couldn't pay your rent. His face changed. I remember. Do you remember who sent you the money? Daniel looked down. You did. And when you lost your first job, you helped me. And when you wanted to start your own business, you gave me the money. I nodded. Your mother sold her jewelry for that. Daniel looked at Eleanor. What? Eleanor immediately shook her head. It wasn't important. Daniel stared at her. Mom, you sold your jewelry? She shrugged. It was just jewelry. No, it wasn't. His eyes became red. That necklace Dad gave you? Eleanor looked away. Daniel suddenly remembered. He had seen his mother wearing that necklace for years. Then one day it was gone. He had never asked why. I had never told him. We didn't want him to feel guilty. We wanted him to succeed. That was all. I sat down. Your mother and I never kept score. Daniel wiped his eyes. Then why did you hide all this? I looked at him. Because we wanted to know whether you would still see us as your parents when you didn't think we had anything to give you. Daniel didn't answer. And I knew the truth hurt him. Because somewhere deep inside, he already knew the answer hadn't been what it should have been. Victoria suddenly spoke. This is all unfair. Everyone turned toward her. She took a breath. You can't blame me for thinking they weren't financially secure. They never told us anything. I looked at her. You're right. She seemed surprised. You're right, I repeated. We never told you. She nodded. Exactly. But that still doesn't explain why you treated Eleanor the way you did. Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. You didn't ask whether she was okay. You didn't ask why she was sitting alone. You didn't ask whether she needed anything. You simply decided she didn't fit the image you wanted for tonight. Victoria's face hardened. You don't understand what it's like having people judge you. I almost laughed. No, Victoria. I understand exactly what it's like. I looked at Eleanor. My wife has spent 40 years being judged by people who only cared about what she could give them. Eleanor reached for my hand. I held it. Then Daniel looked at Victoria. His expression had completely changed. Why did you do it? Victoria looked at him. Because I was embarrassed. The words came out quietly. Daniel stared at her. Embarrassed by my mother? Victoria didn't answer. That silence was enough. Daniel took a step back. Then he looked at Eleanor. I don't know how to fix this. My wife stood up. You don't have to fix everything tonight. Be honest with me. If this were your wife, would you forgive what Victoria did just because she's family? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you stand up and say, enough is enough? Tell me in the comments. I want to know whose side you'd be on. She walked over to him and hugged him. Daniel broke down. He held on to his mother like a little boy again. And for the first time that evening, I saw my son instead of the successful man he had become. But there was still one thing Daniel didn't know. The money I had revealed tonight was only part of the truth. There was another property, one that had been generating income for years. And that property was tied directly to the company Daniel worked for. I had never planned to tell him about it. But after what happened that night, I knew I couldn't keep the truth hidden forever. Because sometimes money doesn't reveal who people are. It simply gives them an opportunity to reveal themselves. The party was over before anyone even touched the birthday cake. People started leaving quietly. No one wanted to be the last guest standing in that living room. Daniel stayed behind. Victoria stayed too, although she barely spoke. Eleanor and I were sitting near the kitchen when Daniel walked over. Dad, can we talk? I nodded. Sure. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. For a few seconds, he just stared at the floor. Then he looked up. I keep thinking about everything you just told me. I figured you would. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled. Because I didn't want money to change our relationship. But it did anyway. That one hurt. I didn't answer. Daniel rubbed his face. I treated you like you were struggling. You didn't treat us badly. He looked at me. Dad, you didn't. I paused. You just stopped paying attention. He lowered his eyes. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be cruel. It just needs to be honest. After a moment, Daniel asked, "What else don't I know?" Eleanor looked at me. I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. There was no point hiding it anymore. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I told you I own the building your company rents." Daniel nodded. "Yes. There is something else." His expression changed. I opened a document on my phone and turned it toward him. Daniel read it. His eyebrows slowly rose. "Dad, what?" "This is the company that owns the entire office complex." I nodded. "Yes." He looked at me. "You own this too?" "Yes." He sat back. "How much rent does my company pay every year?" I gave him the number. Daniel stared at me. Then he laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "So every month?" "Yes." "My company has been paying your company?" "Yes." "And you never told me?" "No." "Why?" I looked at him. "Because I wanted you to build your career on your own." Daniel shook his head. "You could have made things so much easier for me." "I could have." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I didn't raise you to depend on me." He was quiet. Then he asked the question I had been expecting. "Did you ever think I was taking advantage of you?" I looked at Eleanor. She answered before I could. "Never." Daniel looked at his mother. "Even after tonight?" She smiled sadly. "Tonight made us disappointed. It didn't make us stop loving you." Daniel's eyes filled with tears again. He stood up and walked over to Eleanor. He hugged her. This time, she held him tightly. I looked away for a moment. I didn't want them to see my eyes. Then Victoria spoke from across the room. "So what happens now?" Everyone turned toward her. She was standing near the staircase. She looked exhausted. Daniel turned around. "What do you mean?" "Our house." I frowned. Victoria continued. "If your parents own all these properties, what happens to us?" Daniel stared at her. "Why are you asking about money?" "Because this affects us." I shook my head. "No, Victoria." She looked at me. "It affects you." Her expression hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood up. "You told my wife to get out because you thought she had nothing." Victoria didn't respond. "Now you're worried about what we might take away from you." I never said that. You didn't have to. Daniel looked at his wife. And for the first time, I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen before. Disappointment. Not anger. Not confusion. Disappointment. He finally understood that his wife wasn't worried about what she had done to his mother. She was worried about what she might lose. Daniel took a slow breath. "I think you should go upstairs." Victoria stared at him. "What? Just go. You're taking their side?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He looked at Eleanor. "I'm taking my mother's side." Victoria's face changed. She looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at Eleanor. She seemed to realize that the balance of power in the room had shifted. But I wasn't interested in power. I had never been. I only wanted one thing: respect. I walked over to Daniel and put my hand on his shoulder. "Son, don't make a decision tonight." He looked at me. "Why?" "Because you're angry." He nodded slowly. "And because whatever happens next should be about what kind of man you want to be, not what kind of husband you think you need to be." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I understand." Eleanor picked up her purse. It was time to leave. As we walked toward the door, Daniel followed us. "Mom." She turned around. "Yeah. Can I come over tomorrow?" She smiled. "You don't have to ask." He hugged her again. Then he hugged me. When we stepped outside, the cold Chicago air hit my face. Eleanor slipped her arm through mine. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked up at me. "You didn't have to tell him everything." "I know. Are you sure it was the right thing?" I looked back at the house. Daniel was standing behind the window, watching us leave. "I don't know," I said. "But I know one thing." "What?" "After tonight, I don't want my son to ever wonder again whether his mother belongs in his life." Eleanor smiled. And as we walked toward our car, I thought the worst was finally over. I was wrong. Because the next morning, Daniel called me. And the first thing he said was, "Dad, I found something in Victoria's office." My stomach dropped. "What did you find?" There was a long silence. Then Daniel said, "Something that makes me think this wasn't just about Mom." And suddenly, I realized the birthday party had only been the beginning. The next morning, Daniel called me just after 8. I had barely finished my coffee when I saw his name on my phone. "Dad, I need you to come over." His voice sounded different. Not angry, not upset, just shaken. What happened? I found something in Victoria's office. I looked at Eleanor. She immediately knew something was wrong. What kind of something? I asked. I don't want to talk about it over the phone. I sighed. Okay, I'll be there. 20 minutes later, Eleanor and I were standing in Daniel's living room. The house looked completely different without the party decorations. Balloons were scattered across the floor. Half-empty bottles sat on the kitchen counter. The birthday cake was still sitting on the table, untouched. Daniel walked toward us holding a folder. I found this in Victoria's desk. He handed it to me. I opened it. The first page was a financial statement. Then another. And another. I looked at Daniel. What am I looking at? She has been going through our finances. I frowned. Your finances? He nodded. For months. Eleanor looked concerned. Why? Daniel shook his head. I didn't know. I turned another page. There were notes. Property values. Bank accounts. Investment information. Even the names of some of my business partners. Victoria had been digging into my finances. Not casually. She had been trying to figure out exactly how much money Eleanor and I had. I looked at Daniel. Did she know about the properties? Not everything. But she suspected? He nodded. She thought you were hiding money. I closed the folder. So that's why she treated your mother like that. Daniel looked at the floor. She thought if she could push you away, she could get closer to the money. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told me everything. Eleanor sat down. She looked heartbroken. Not because of the money. Because she had trusted Victoria. I never thought she saw us that way, she whispered. I sat beside her. Neither did I. Daniel walked toward the window. I think she wanted us to move. Move. He nodded. She wanted us to sell this house and buy something bigger. I looked at him. Why? She found a neighborhood she liked. He laughed bitterly. She said our current house made us look less successful. I shook my head. And you agreed? I didn't know how serious she was. Daniel turned around. She wanted me to ask you for money. That explained everything. The insults. The embarrassment. The way Victoria had looked at Eleanor. She hadn't simply wanted my wife out of the house. She wanted to control who had access to us. She wanted to make Daniel believe that his parents were obstacles instead of family. Daniel sat down across from me. Dad, I'm ashamed. You should be disappointed in yourself. He nodded. I am. But being ashamed isn't enough. He looked at me. What do I do? I leaned back. You decide who you want to be. He was quiet. Then he said, I think I've spent too much time trying to make my wife happy. I looked at him. And not enough time making sure you were still a good son. He nodded. I know. Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to choose between us and her. Daniel looked at his mother. But I do have to choose what kind of behavior I will accept. She smiled. That sounds more like you. I looked at my son. For the first time in years, he seemed like the young man I remembered. Not the executive. Not the homeowner. Not the husband trying to impress everyone. Just Daniel. My son. Victoria came downstairs a few minutes later. She stopped when she saw us. What are they doing here? Daniel stood. We need to talk. She looked at the folder in his hand. Her face changed. You went through my things. I found it. You had no right. Daniel shook his head. No, Victoria. You had no right. She stared at him. Then she looked at me. You think you've won because you have money? I shook my head. No. Then what do you want? I looked at Eleanor. I want my wife to never be treated like she is less than anyone else again. Victoria laughed bitterly. You're making this all about one sentence. No. I stood up. It isn't about one sentence. I looked directly at her. It is about every little insult before that sentence. I paused. The comments about her clothes. The way you isolated her at dinner. The way you made her feel unwanted. And finally, telling her to get out. Victoria looked away. Daniel stepped beside me. You owe my mother an apology. Victoria didn't say anything. An apology, Daniel repeated. She finally looked at Eleanor. Her voice was quiet. I'm sorry. Eleanor nodded. Thank you. That was it. No shouting. No revenge. No dramatic speech. Just two people finally facing the consequences of their choices. Daniel later told me he was going to get counseling with Victoria before making any decisions about their marriage. I didn't ask what would happen. That was their decision. As for me and Eleanor, we went home. That evening, We sat together on our back porch. The sun was setting. Eleanor leaned her head against my shoulder. Do you regret telling them? I thought about it. Then I smiled. No. Why? Because I didn't reveal the money to embarrass anyone. I looked at her. I revealed it because they had forgotten something much more important. What? That family isn't measured by what someone owns. Eleanor smiled. I took her hand. And respect should never depend on someone's bank account. She squeezed my fingers. For 40 years, we had built our life together. Not with fancy cars. Not with expensive parties. Not with people applauding us. We built it quietly, one sacrifice at a time. And maybe that was the lesson my son needed most. Money can buy a house. It can buy a business. It can even buy comfort. But it cannot buy a family that genuinely loves you. And after everything that happened at my son's birthday, I finally understood something. The most valuable thing Eleanor and I had ever given Daniel wasn't money. It was the chance to become a better man. And this time, it was up to him to decide what he would do with it.